Atrocity survivors in Ethiopia remain without justice. From Amnesty International, March 19, 2024. A year after releasing an atrocity determination opens in a new tab for the conflict in northern Ethiopia. The United States government has not made any updates or taken on new policy changes towards justice and accountability. An atrocity determination without meaningful policy change that addresses the pervasive cycle of impunity in Ethiopia isn't worth much to victims and survivors of these crimes, warned Kate Hixon, Advocacy Director for Africa with Amnesty International USA. The U.S. government must support survivors to ensure they receive the justice and accountability they demand and to which they have a right. The State Department should also seek to update the determination to address justice and accountability issues amid the ongoing armed conflict in the Amhara region, where Amnesty International documented possible war crimes. On March 20, 2023, U.S. Secretary of Antony Blinken announced a U.S. government atrocity determination that all parties to the conflict in northern Ethiopia committed war crimes. It found that the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, Eritrean Defense Forces and Amhara forces also committed crimes against humanity, including murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence and persecution. Members of the Amhara forces were also identified as responsible for committing the crime against humanity of deportation or forcible transfer and committed ethnic cleansing in Western Tigray. Despite asks from international human rights organizations and many in Ethiopian civil society, the U.S. was complacent in allowing the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia mandate to expire in October 2023. Since the cessation of hostilities, Ethiopian authorities have not taken meaningful steps towards justice and accountability for crimes committed during the conflict in northern Ethiopia. Additionally, INF and the Fano militia are now fighting in another armed conflict in Amhara region where Amnesty International documented possible war crimes by the INF. The INF and Amhara forces, which includes the Fano militia and Amhara special forces, were named as perpetrators of atrocity crimes in the 2023 determination for their acts in the Tigray region. Since armed conflict broke out in early August, the entire Amhara region has been under an internet blackout. Independent journalists are barred from reporting on the conflict, and they are persecuted if they attempt to. Ethiopian authorities continue to use the state of emergency law to crack down on anyone who dares to dissent peacefully. Amnesty International also continues to receive reports of harassment against civil society organizations in Ethiopia by the government. Secretary Blinken must urgently work with the African Union and the international community to engage the government of Ethiopia to order the Ethiopian National Defense Force, ENDF, to stop targeting civilians in the Amhara region. He must also ensure that the United States broaden its analysis of atrocity determination into the Amhara and Oromia region, where active risks of atrocities exist amid ongoing armed conflict, to urgently address justice and accountability issues, concluded Hixon.
So in 2021 alone, we recorded 14 million displacements or movements that were linked to conflict and violence. Now, 80% of these movements happened in Africa. So if you think about, for example, the crisis in northern Ethiopia or even the DRC, which together those two countries account for most of these movements, but also new waves of violence in Burkina Faso, in Mali, Sudan, the Central African Republic, which have pushed people to seek refuge in other parts of their country as they've tried to escape this often intercommunal violence or attacks that are committed by non-state armed groups. So in a lot of cases, these new waves of violence are just fueling already existing and very protracted crises. If you think about the DRC, it's a protracted crisis that has been ongoing now for decades. And these are adding to the needs of people who are now becoming displaced repeatedly and oftentimes with very little humanitarian assistance.
Thank you. The whole world is transfixed by the humanitarian disaster in Ukraine. but 500,000 people have died in northern Ethiopia. As you note in your testimony, the majority of those facing famine-like conditions in northern Ethiopia, and 90% of Tigray's population needs humanitarian assistance. Right now, maybe 3 to 5% of the amount of food that's needed is being allowed in. And this is not because humanitarian organizations don't have the food and the capacity. It's because the Ethiopian government lets only a few percent in, and the Eritrean government lets nothing in. Back in December, the Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, Molly Fee, testified before our committee that the State Department had decided to refrain at the current moment from making a public determination on atrocities, human rights, but most significantly, whether this is a genocide or an attempted genocide. Just last month, Secretary Blinken was sitting where you are now, and he testified that a legal determination will in fact be made on those issues by the State Department. It may not be your exact portfolio, but there's very few people in America who have your background. In your testimony, you say that addressing these atrocities in Ethiopia is a major top priority. If you have a government, or in this case two governments, deliberately starving hundreds of thousands of civilians to death, does that constitute a genocide or attempted genocide?
Thank you, Congressman. Obviously, in my past life, this is a question, questions of what constitutes a genocide or how courts have adjudicated that over time is something I've studied a lot. But as you noted, it is not something as U.S. aid administrator that I'm involved in terms of making that determination, and you have raised it with Secretary Blinken. I believe he's given you the assurance that that determination will come. I don't think the question of again, whether one is using whether that legal determination is made is influencing in any way the U.S. government's posture toward the Ethiopian government. In other words, we are acting in just the same way we would be irrespective of
I would point out that in this room, I've suggested ways to pressure the Ethiopian and especially on particularly the Eritrean government, which has, of course, the ports that could be used, particularly by interrupting sea traffic going, even hundreds of miles away from Eritrea. So I think a determination of genocide would spur our administration to do more than simply send harsh letters to Addis Ababa and Asmara. You visited the refugee camp in Sudan, where Tigrayan refugees are also hungry. Are we going to increase our aid to those refugees?
Well, we are, as part of the broader package of assistance that we hope is going to be voted on by the Senate, we are able now to have additional humanitarian assistance to meet global needs that are profound. And just to come back to where you started, you do have 1 million people facing famine in Ethiopia by the end of June. I mean, we're past mid-May. This is upon us, and that includes 700,000 people in Tigray. So, I think the pressure by the United States has been a belated but an important factor in why the number of trucks that have gotten into Tigray in recent days has increased. We got 320 trucks in this past week. But Congressman, as you know better than anybody, we need 500 trucks a week if we are going to meet those needs.
And I would say that Congress should provide the money, but only the administration can provide the pressure, and only the administration can use the U.S. Navy to put additional pressure on the two countries involved. And without that pressure, you got a certain number of trucks in with oral pressure. We can do more. I yield back.